So I'm back here now with the K30 Ultra. It has been 2 weeks. We have a new firmware update from Xiaomi. Now the changelog doesn't specifically say or state that it's fixing a frames per second UI smoothness issue, but it certainly does improve upon that. Now I'm going to break out that FPS counter that is part of the actual developer options, part of this ROM, and we'll take a look in detail here, analyze that performance. Are we still going to see lags? Will the UI now run at a solid 120 frames per second, as well as a few other commonly asked questions that did pop up in my review. So my complaint was, my issue is, again, that animation. It's the jump. It's the jump of having something rendered at that battery saving 1 or 2 frames per second to when you trigger the gestures, the jump is just so slow. It's not as smooth as it should be. On their more premium phones that will be featured later on in this video on the Mi 10 Ultra, you don't really notice this as much. And I know it's something I have been talking about a long time with Xiaomi and other brands. They do things a little different. Other brands tend to force maybe higher frames per second. So right now in the UI, you can see that once I start using it a lot, it picks up the frame count here. You can see currently, I've zoomed into it now so you can see, like just scrolling here, this is now going to go up to about 100 frames per second, but it never seems to really push 120. So this is the issue that I hope the patch is going to fix here. So what I'll do now is go over and, that was also very, very laggy. So bringing down notifications is probably the worst with that particular little issue here. So I don't have the setting in here right now to reboot, but let's just jump in now to settings and I get out of this and we'll go and reboot. Okay, so I'm gonna hit update, reboot. Okay, and I'll come back now to show you if it's fixed this frame rate issue or not. Okay, so here we are back up and running now with the new firmware. I've been testing it out a little bit and there's some good and there's some bad. So I'll first show you the good things. Yes, you can see now 120 frames per second. You can see the frame rate, but there are some clear dips with this new little graph. They've got a new widget now, which is quite a good looking one. So you see that when I go into now the apps drawer, that is pretty smooth. So it dipped down to 113 frames per second. This just feels so much faster here. And what about the worst? The worst thing for me was the notifications. Pulling down the notifications, although I don't have many at the moment, is so much better now. That has really, really improved. So I'm glad to see Xiaomi's onto this. They're getting things and improving it. So what about bringing up the gallery here? That does dip down, but it's not too bad now. So going from 120 frames per second to 93, you don't actually really notice this, okay? Unless you're some sort of elite pro gamer with your 360 frames per second hertz screen, then you might be able to see this. So what about here in the gallery? Okay, it still maintains a very, very good frame rate there. So that is excellent. And the animations, so it does dip a little, but again, not really much. I can't see it. Before it was dipping right down to 80 frames per second. And let's just bring up recents as well. Much better, much, much better. So that dipped down to 108 to 115 frames per second. However, I did discover this. So there's still some areas for improvement. Firmware updates should correct this, but watch. Okay, Apps Vault, that is definitely a little bit laggy. See that? 43 frames per second. So that definitely needs some optimization there. So I have been, if you follow me on the channel, ranting on for years and years and years, ever since really the beginning of reviewing Xiaomi devices about MIUI lag, MIUI stutter, animation stutter. And we're getting there eventually, Xiaomi, but yep, still present with just some things. So of course, they will need to work on that. All right, so this popped up a lot. A lot of people are asking me about installing a third-party launcher. Now, I don't use too many third-party launchers, but the one I do have, and I've got the Nova Launcher Prime app that's already on and installed, is Nova Launcher. So you can set this as your default launcher, right? You can get rid of MIUI. In a way, it's still going to always be there, of course. That's their skin on top of Android 10. But launching it, there we go. That was quick. And look at this performance. Now, when we swipe here and bring up the menu, on the left, we don't have Xiaomi's laggy app vault that I showed you just before, lagging out to, 40 frames per second or something. This now is so quick. This now does feel definitely like a flagship. Look at this performance. The whole time it is a constant about, look at that, it's keeping over really 110 frames per second. I can't see any difference at all now. This is really, really quick. So of course, when I swipe up to recent apps or swipe to home, that then has triggered and brought back MIUI as the default launcher. So actually, no, I thought, when has this changed? I don't know when this has changed, but look at this. If you go to your launcher home settings and try and set Nova Launcher as home, they are doing a Nubia, they're doing a Red Magic, they're doing, who else does it? Well, quite a few others. So settings here, you go into more, and right here, default launcher, so system launcher. I don't want system launcher, I want Nova Launcher now. Look at this, look what happens. Error. As launcher apps from third parties may result in problems like data leak, abnormal battery drain, lagging, etc. That's funny, lagging. Only those verified by MIUI can be set as your default launcher. So that's really annoying. It's not allowing me to do this. So I wonder if Apex launcher is verified by them. We can use at least Apex. Is Apex even still around? I'll have to check into this, and a bit more digging around is needed. So that is disappointing to see there that they don't let us use Nova Launcher. So here we have the K30 Ultra here in the middle with the stress test that I ran on various different mobile phones, okay? So this is the POCO F2 Pro right here. POCO F2 Pro, it goes down to 80% of its maximum performance. This is 73, so yes, it looks like the Dimensity 1000 Plus is worse off here, so it throttles down more. But I just want to point out that these tests are unrealistic, and I don't like to really do them much anymore, especially for PC Tech I review. A lot of people love to just have 100% CPU load, 100% GPU load, and that's just not realistic, because when you're playing games or doing anything else, it's never actually going to be 100% on everything. So you can see there is a difference here with the clocks going up and down. That's normal. So let me bring in a more premium phone here from Xiaomi, which is the Mi 10 Ultra. So the Mi 10 Ultra, it also does throttle. It throttles down to, you can see there, it's just getting below 80% as well. But look at the clocks. These clocks are locked the whole time on all of those 8 cores. And that is just at the moment now, because that's just the current monitor. It's still actually running here at the moment. It's got another 4 minutes to go. But you can see, I'm just trying to make a point here that all of the higher end phones actually do throttle down. But when you look at more of the mid-range chips, okay, so this is the Snapdragon 732G. This is in the POCO X3. Same test. 15 minutes, and it barely throttled. It got down to 93% of its maximum performance. You can see right here. So that was only a 7% loss in performance. But you have to factor in that those clocks are much lower than these two other devices here. So this is why I think this test isn't really that realistic. I always go based off real world use. So especially when gaming, I don't see a huge massive change. So after the 10-minute mark when I'm gaming, I can't see any visible throttling there. So I did do a camera comparison. If you haven't seen it, do check it out. It's really interesting. It's in the channel. And in this test, the K30 Ultra, it aced it. It got the best details from the main 64 megapixel camera. It had the best white balance. I also found that the portrait photos looked the best on the K30 Ultra out of those 3 phones I was comparing, the POCO X3 NFC and the POCO F2 Pro against this K30 Ultra. Did really well. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about some of the other frequently asked questions. So one of them was on-screen display. Does it have it? Yes, of course it does. Being an AMOLED, they do always include this feature, Xiaomi. So this here, what you're seeing is actually going to move around on the screen. Eventually it moves around. The same with where the fingerprint is, okay? That's to try and cut down on that OLED, AMOLED screen burn that can, yes, always happen. It's possible. If you're always going to have the screen on displaying a certain image, then that eventually will burn in after time. But that's why they have a screen timeout limit on this model here of only 10 minutes. You can't set it to never like you can with the IPS panels with the timeout, with the lock screen timeout. So tapping, see how it's moved? Tapping here now, fingerprint reader, and it is working great for me. And it seems after the firmware update, it's pretty much exactly the same. I can't really see any change there with it. So there were a couple of frequently asked questions that I can't answer in this video. One was GPS. Why didn't I show it in the initial K30 Ultra review? Simple fact is, I didn't know it was missing from my edit, okay? I take various different takes. Sometimes I make an error. I have to record again, and for some reason I forgot to show it. But I'm going to load it up now, and this probably won't work too well because I'm indoors. But it does actually work very well to get a lock, and even here it's got a lock already, so that was very, very quick. Now I do see accuracies down to 1 meter when outside, and you're probably going to see indoors, I wouldn't say it's going to get any better than what it is now, 2 meters of accuracy. The Qualcomms, they cap out at 3, but this does have excellent GPS performance. There is here a hardware compass as well, like all other phones with this kind of spec at least, and it does work well. I find the GPS is not like the terrible rubbish we used to have with MediaTek quite a few generations ago. No, it is working really quite well. The other was, you've probably seen it here if you're after this information, is Safety Net test. So for your banking apps and everything, let's run this. Unfortunately, it's not going to actually work, okay? It's going to come back and say fail. So that's not good to see. Now, I did the same thing, the Safety Net test, with my Mi 10 Ultra that I have right here. And in fact, I'll do it again for you because it's not going to take long. And this is a bit of a surprise. This one gets a pass. And that to me means that maybe this is going to get a global release. Who knows? The Mi 10 Ultra could be the Mi 10T. But it's just speculation at the moment. We don't actually know anything. I've got no inside information or anything like that. So that was basically those commonly asked questions there. That overall, this phone, using it, it's like flagship performance with many, many different things. Make sure you check my full detailed K30 Ultra review. All right, so overall, I think Xiaomi has done an excellent job. Hardware-wise, it is definitely there. It's just that optimization with the ROM, still not quite there, but it is really good to see the improvements there. The UI, getting it in and around, launching your apps, multitasking is so much more fluid now. So that main con really that I talked about in the K30 Ultra, the main review, make sure you check that out for the battery life and for every single thing else that I did cover in that particular review, the screen in detail, is now so much better, of course. It's just way more fluid. However, as I showed you, that apps vault is laggy, okay? And when did Xiaomi start to block now third-party launchers from being the default home launcher? Is it just this phone? Is this a new thing? Because I don't normally, because I test my phone stock, I don't normally mess about with the launchers. I keep everything stock. So if you were to buy one, pull it out of the box, exactly what is the experience is what I want to portray and convey in my videos here. So that's why I don't run the third-party launchers, but that's definitely not a good move if they're doing that. It's similar to, say, the Red Magic 5S that I have. You cannot change the default launcher as well. So if you don't like it, they're like, oh, well, tough bickies, you're stuck with it now, which is not great. Apart from that, the camera performance in general, for the price it sells for, it remains like my first review. Nothing has really changed. It does come recommended, great screen, great build quality. Battery life is very good, although now it's probably going to be quite different from my review, so I probably have to retest that. The only real thing is it holds people back, and like I've said to many in the comments on Twitter, DMs, and on the comments in YouTube, is two things really, the big two things. This does not have LTE Band 20. That's the big thing holding back a lot of people. The second one is the ROM itself, okay? With the Chinese in there, Chinese apps, you need to remove them, and it's only English and Chinese. So hopefully we are going to see a global version of this. If we're going to see it, that is. They could rebrand it as maybe a POCO phone. Hopefully they do. A global release is definitely much needed for this particular model. And now there's actually a third too as well, because it didn't pass that safety net check, did it? So if you need that, if you need the banking features, the NFC with this particular phone, with your banking security and all that, sadly doesn't have it, but that could of course change in the firmware. So it's all down to software. Hardware's there. Yet again with Xiaomi, it's the software. So eventually with mature firmware and those firmware updates, we should see this thing hopefully down the road in another couple of months being almost a perfect device for the price, that is.